So, hi everyone. Thank you guys so much for making time to come today. I'm really excited to see you all here and to talk about portfolios. This is the first of our professionalism series, which is going to have 3 different seminars. This one, which is portfolios and looking for a job. Our second one, which is like getting a job and understanding things like your contract. And the third one, which is what happens after your internship, including networking and certain challenges that kind of come with being an intern. So today we're going to be talking about portfolios and the process of finding an internship. I know that that's something that's super challenging, especially right now. But hopefully having a good portfolio can give you guys a little bit of a leg up. Everyone has resumes, but when we're engineers, portfolios end up being super important because they showcase our engineering. So just a little bit about me. My name is Grace Carley. I'm a 4th-year mechanical and aerospace engineering major. Prior to the pandemic, I worked in the Engineering Student Design Center as an ESDC shop technician. So I made things for the college, supervised for safety, and taught the shop safety course on occasion. In addition to that, I also have worked for Apple for the past several years during the summers as a reliability intern. And then again, as a manufacturing intern. As a manufacturing intern, I spent 6 months with that team working on watch bands. So, benefits of a portfolio. Portfolios are important because they will provide examples of your work, they demonstrate your engineering skills, they're a great avenue to highlight special skills that will make you attractive to recruiters, and they basically are a supplement to your resume. All of those things that only get 1 or 2 lines on your resume, they can get a whole slide in your portfolio. So portfolios are often either slide decks or websites. Today I'm going to be talking about slide decks because they're a lot more accessible. Coding an entire website is a fairly large undertaking. And if that is kind of in the field that you're going to be going into, it would make sense to do. But if you're somebody like me who's a mechanical engineer and has absolutely zero clue how to code a website, slide decks are much more accessible. You can make them on Google Slides where you can use a shareable link that you can add to your resume and produce PDFs that you can add as supplemental materials on applications. So at the end of this, we're going to kind of be going over to like a quick Google Slides, like making a portfolio slides session where you guys can bring, hopefully if you have some materials on a project you love, you can make a portfolio slide together and, you know, find where the link is, all of that. I just realized I'm just looking at my keynote and not presenting my keynote. I'm using a keynote just to bring that up instead of Google Slides because all of my current portfolios are actually in the form of keynotes because I've been working internally at Apple for a couple of years. And so keynote is the expected form of presentation and they just don't say PowerPoint ever. But my external slides are still in Google Slides. I just figured if I'm going to be talking to you about slide design, I should put forth my best slide design, and that's in Keynote. So that's kind of the benefits of the portfolio. What you want to put in a portfolio is your favorite projects. That's the biggest one. That's the most important one because your portfolio is giving you the chance to highlight and talk about these things in hopefully an interview. In addition to that, you want different types of relevant work to show your variety of skills. You want examples of special skills, particularly things that are going to make you attractive to the company you're applying to. Relevant coursework to demonstrate competence, as well as any additional information that you can provide on a case-by-case basis, depending on which companies you're applying to. For instance, if you're going to include a hobby that can make you attractive to one company because it shows that you're actively engaged in the industry that they serve, however, it's something that's unrelated to a different company, you'll probably want to drop those slides when applying to the second company. So the basic structure of a portfolio. You're going to have an introduction slide that gives similar information to your resume. Who are you? Where do you go to school? How do they contact you if you're interested? Usually resume and portfolio are presented kind of in conjunction, but sometimes they can be separated and you want anyone who sees your portfolio to be able to contact you with potential job offers. So after that, we get into kind of the 4 phases of example projects, and those are technical projects. So things that you've made, things that you've coded, stuff that really demonstrates that you're able to do the job you want. Early phase work, that's in the case of somebody like a mechanical engineer, it's sketches, it's early phase prototypes, it's proof of concept, basically showing that you have the understanding to do like deep level work. Additionally, this lets you show projects that maybe didn't make it to the final phase. So things that are in progress, things that were really only ever concepts, but it's a really solid concept. After that, you want technical special skills. So things like I am particularly skilled in MATLAB to the point of writing my own image analysis tools. That's something that is useful as a manufacturing intern, because when I was told I had to do something that involved analyzing parts and I didn't really want to do it by hand, I coded a tool that did it for me. And I was able to hand that off at the end of my internship, and it ended up being a big asset. So those kinds of skills are important to highlight to recruiters. After that are non-technical special skills, things like the sewing that can help you be more attractive to recruiters, but they're kind of second to your engineering skills. And we want to include them when they're going to give you a better chance of getting the job. So here's kind of a few examples of things that fall into each of those categories. Now, the next few slides, I'm basically going to go through each of these categories and show an example slide of what we'd kind of be looking for slides in that category, appropriate material, because a lot of the material that I've produced that I have in my current portfolios is internalized to the company I work at. Most of it is projects from my first and second year, which is hopefully relevant to some of you guys who are in your first and second year and looking for those internships. For those of you who are in your senior years, you're probably going to have more advanced projects than this, but the same principles apply. You probably just might need slightly more explanation for some of the stuff. Now, please drop any questions you guys have in the chat or speak up if there's something I can clarify or something that may apply to your specific situation. We're also going to have time for questions at the end of this bit before we go into the kind of Google Slides demo. So first off is introduction. Like I said before, this is just a little bit about you. So name, address, phone. I tend to include my GPA. That's kind of a habit thing out of, I used to apply to a lot of aerospace jobs before I figured out what I was going to do. Year and expected graduation. So I don't know if this is true of all fields, but at least in my experience, I have found that a lot of people find expected graduation very important. Basically, they want to know either if they're going to hire you, how soon, or if they're going to hire you as an intern, how long until they can hire you full time. And so it's pretty important to always usually have that on your resume and in your portfolio. Like I said before, your portfolio is probably going to be something that's relatively easy to access. In my case, it's like a public link. And so you want anyone who looks at it, even if they don't have your resume, to still be able to contact you. The information page is also a good place to put a photo if that's something you feel comfortable with. So next, we're going to look at technical projects. So this is an example from Engineering 3, which I took my sophomore year. This is Harold, the hydraulic automated rapidly oscillating laundering device. Harold was built to the prototype phase, which is one of my more advanced projects for my first couple of years. It's split into 2 slides because I have a lot of what I felt like were compelling images associated with this project. And I wanted to make sure that I included all of them without the slide getting too busy. One great thing about slide decks as a portfolio vehicle is you can give projects multiple slides. You probably don't want to give them 5, but having 2 or 3 for a particular complicated project is totally appropriate. You do want to keep the words kind of to a minimum. I find that the best way to do it is to kind of provide enough background information so that whatever you're building is in context and can be explained to somebody who's not in your field, but not much more than that, because the way that I view portfolios, and this is obviously a little bit of a personal thing, is a portfolio is a supplementary material that makes me attractive to recruiters as a candidate and makes them interested in what I'm doing. So I want to get questions about what's in my portfolio during my interview. So if I provide all the information they could possibly want, they're not going to ask me anything. And so it makes you a very good candidate to have interesting projects, because it also gives them something to discuss in your interview with you. Any interviews that I've gotten based off of jobs where I've submitted my portfolio, I'm usually asked about something in it, and it's usually whatever's most relevant to that particular job. And so that gives you kind of the chance to have things that you know a lot about that you can talk about in the interviews. So you don't spend the whole interview doing how do you manufacture a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter cube, which is, fun fact, a question I've been asked.
I see we have a question.
Yes. No, sorry, that was totally an accident.
Ah.
No problem. Gave me a chance to get some water. All right, so this is the first page for Harold. I've got the product logo I designed, fun fact, on a smartboard. And then here we have CAD and the prototype. So this is nice because it's laid out in a relatively easy to read format. That's another thing. I recommend easy to read fonts. That sounds nitpicky, but like don't use Times New Roman. It's hard to read, which sounds also a little nitpicky, but fonts that are like Arial that are designed to be read slower are usually easier on the eyes. Celia, do you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, thank you for presenting to us. But so for technical projects, I feel like I've worked on a lot of projects, but not all of them, or the majority of them, have not been successful. Would we include those here?
That depends on how comfortable you are with the project. If it was unsuccessful, but it was a learning experience that you would like talking about, I wouldn't hesitate to include it. You don't only have to put successes, because recruiters are often also interested in your failures. They pretty much always ask, what's the time you failed and how did you deal with it? Mm-hmm. If you had a project that you worked really hard on and learned a lot from, that's a great thing to bring up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Also, your portfolio is going to evolve as you do. So most of the things that are on these example slides are no longer things in my portfolio because I have advanced past the point of having space for them, but they were still good projects that worked really well. And so you'll be able to kind of update your information to prioritize your top projects as you get new ones. But that doesn't mean that when you're first starting out and you're building your first portfolio, you shouldn't include anything relevant. Speaking of, the guitar. This is another technical projects example, and it kind of gets into that, I don't have a lot of projects yet. What do I put in my portfolio question? The answer is anything that really makes sense. This is my high school guitar. I built it as a physics project. It's one of my favorite things to include whenever people ask me about projects, because it's just so weird to say that, oh yes, this is the guitar I built in high school. That's a benefit to me because it invites questions. When I worked in the ESDC, part of the reason I got that job is I told Mike, the former manager, that I had built a guitar and he just wanted to learn more. And so I talked about all my experience using this list of tools over here to make this guitar. And it showed that I had a lot of shop experience. And also it's a really fun project. It's something I'm excited about. I still talk about it because let's be honest, it's pretty cool that I built a fully functional guitar in a wood shop from the 1970s. And so it's something that bring up. So it doesn't come up in job interviews anymore, but it was really great when it did. So if you have projects like that from your first couple years of college, from high school, that are just interesting and they're even tangentially related to what that you do, include them, and you can include them in the technical section. I used a lot of hand tools on this guitar. It belongs in the technical section, even though it's not something from college. So moving on to relevant skills. Things like coding and SolidWorks. So I mentioned MATLAB is a big one. Having like one slide that explains maybe some of like the complex code you've written. I know that a lot of build teams here do, like, I know that Space and Satellites has a lot of complex code they write. If you've like learned software for CNCing on a different team, this is where you want to put that stuff. Those are important skills that you want to highlight. In this case, we're looking at CAD, SolidWorks particularly. So this is the castle project. This is something I imposed on myself. I don't even know why. When I was in my first year, and I decided I was going to CAD Sleeping Beauty's castle because I didn't want to lose my CAD skills before senior design. Joke's on me, I did aerospace senior design, didn't use SolidWorks, but I still have the skills and they're useful and I used to use them at my work. So this demonstrates a few things with very few words. As you can see, I only have 2 lines of information on this slide. That's all it really needs. It explains what it is, a castle based on Sleeping Beauty's castle, and why it exists. I decided to challenge myself in SolidWorks. But the things that the imaging shows is that 1, I'm able to create ANSI standard documentation, and I know what that looks like. 2, I'm able to do complex design in SolidWorks. And 3, I know how to 3D print. And how to 3D print complex shapes with high resolution. So when I talk about things like your images speaking for you, this is what I mean. You can choose minimal images for something that you can't really allocate a lot of space to that say a lot. So that way you can have a section that has maybe like 2 or 3 special skills that are high impact. A recruiter sees them and is like, wow, they really know their way around that program. And it's another one where, you know, if you don't have an example, make one. You know what looks impressive in that software. Make something that doesn't take a lot of time, but looks impressive. It's enough sometimes. Alrighty. So the last category is non-technical special skills. So this is where it gets a little bit subjective and should be on kind of like a case-by-case basis. So mine is fashion. Like I said, I sew clothes, and these are examples of some things I've made, from full outfits to shirts I've manufactured during the pandemic, skirts. It shows something related to my field, which is mechanical engineering. I design things for a living. And so making something out of fabric really isn't too far off from making something out of metal. I still have to design it, pattern it, and manufacture it. So this shows the ability to go through that process. And it also shows creativity, which is something that I feel like we don't talk about enough as engineers, is that creativity is so valuable. Companies want creative people because you're gonna be the ones coming up with the innovative projects, the solutions that make a big difference in the company, everything like that. It comes from people with creativity. So if you can show that you're creative, that's a boon. It's good for you. And I believe I mentioned earlier, this is actually what I got asked about in my last interview. I haven't done an interview since because I'm returning to that job. And so they basically looked at my shop experience and they looked at my fashion experience and they asked me to make fabric out of metal. And so now I make what's essentially chainmail for watches. And it's a job that I really, really love. And I think it's a great starting place for my career. And hopefully I get to start my career there. But I remember sitting in there discussing that yellow skirt with my boss because she asked me how I made it with pockets because I was excited and told her it had pockets when she mentioned it. So slides like this can be really useful. But like I said before, you kind of want them on a case-by-case basis. I would not submit the slide to an aerospace company. It has nothing to do with aerospace. But, too far. If you're somebody who's, say, going into toy making, having something with like a lot of color that shows that you've made non-technical items that are functional could be very good for you. I'm just gonna check the chat real quick, make sure I haven't missed anything. I see somebody's working on another CAD design that doesn't necessarily have a purpose. They're fun and they're good for your portfolio. So lastly, some takeaways from all of this. The first one is big. Focus on what you're proud of and what you want to talk about. These are things you want to bring up in your interview and you want to be excited about. The best thing to do as an interview is when your interviewer asks you, so tell me about this project, is you go, I cannot wait to talk about that. Let me tell you why it's so important to me and why I'm so happy with the work that I've done on it. And the project didn't have to be successful. If you're happy with what you did and what you learned, talk about that. They love hearing about what you learned because it proves that you can learn from failure, which is another really important skill in the workforce. The next one, front load and prioritize your most relevant work. Odds are your recruiter is going to look at this before the person interviewing you. Recruiters are looking for, does this person have what we need for this job? They might not go all the way to the bottom. So put your most impressive stuff up front, kind of in their face. They're going to see it in the first 5 slides. Include large photos and screenshots. You want to do the talking in the interview. Don't let the slides talk for you. They're supplementary. They're not doing all of the work. Trust your work to speak for itself. It's kind of the same thing. You want to write information not indicated by the photo so that the portfolio can be looked at without like being able to talk to you and it makes sense. But it leaves questions like, why did you build a guitar? How did you learn to sew? Like, how are your SolidWorks skills now? How did you develop that project? Especially good or when you've continued working on the project and you can tell them where you are now. And lastly, include things that make you unique and interesting. It's a tough job market right now. It's hard. And so including things that make you personally special is your best chance to stand out to recruiters and be one of the, like 5 out of 100 people who gets a call. And since portfolios are kind of something that you can make and submit a lot of places, it's a great way to make yourself stand out that doesn't take, hours writing super personalized stuff for every company. Because what makes you you and what makes you special doesn't change based on the company you're going for. You might tweak special information, But the main meat of this, who you are, is constant. So once you make it, you're there. You then have it, and you're gonna have to update it periodically, but it's there. So let's see, that took about half of our time, which was what I was shooting for. I can answer any questions you guys have about this. And then I was thinking we could do a quick kind of like, not Google Slides tutorial, because I think we all know how to use Google Slides, but making a page that really focuses on like one project and shows it off best. So to answer your question, Emily, I typically only have 1 or 2 hobby slides, and it's not so much of a, do I show them or like, do I change it for every company? It's a lot more of like, are they there or not? Like, is this a company that sees hobbies as a negative or a positive? So I really just have 2 versions of my portfolio, one with and one without those particular slides. And so if it's a company that, you know, makes sense to have them, I leave them in. If not, I would send the other version. It's relatively like low stress. Right, so people who don't have any content in their portfolios in the moment and don't know where to start. Coursework. Your coursework is gonna force you to make things. Start there. Engineering 3, if you haven't taken it yet, go do it. It's a great place to get something started. So start with coursework and then find something in your field that you find really interesting. So like, say you're biomedical, like find a part of biomedical that you think you could see yourself working in, or if you're mechanical, find something that you find super interesting. Like I really love animatronics. And so in the background, like when I was working, I've been building a small animatronic. And so find something like that and do a small personal project. It doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be hard, it doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to exist. And then you can add that. And even stuff like doing basic design. So having sketches, like my very first portfolio, at the end of this, I'm gonna show you guys my first portfolio and you're gonna understand that it does not have to be amazing. Put in sketches, draw stuff, like just anything related can go in there. Ready. Isabel, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you again for presenting and answering all our questions. Since you mentioned biomedical, I'm a biomedical engineering major, and I'm like pretty lost on how to like form a portfolio, and I just thought of like SolidWorks mostly. I was thinking if like maybe you had any friends in biomedical who had other things in their portfolio, some ideas.
Yeah, I have a few friends in biomedical. So biomedical, actually, you guys get to take BIM 110 your senior year. That's in the machine shop and you build a microscope. There are clubs also within biomedical that build things. So that's kind of like that's a good place to work on things. You can also look into lab work. Biomedical is so when you're in biomedical, lab work is your friend, because it gives you the opportunity to make stuff related to your field. Biomedical, when it comes to hands-on stuff, is a slightly less accessible field when it comes to, like, I'm mechanical. I can just go in the shop and build things. It doesn't have to make sense. I built a lamp once. My boss considered it impressive. Biomedical is harder because your stuff is more specialized and it's usually human related, which that's where the hard part comes in. So clubs are your best friend, research is your best friend. Outside of that, yeah, do some SolidWorks. Just like CAD, I don't know, for example, a medical device that you think would be useful. You don't have to be able to build it, but just having the idea and creating some sort of plan for it is enough, especially when you're getting started. Does that kind of answer and help a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
If I can jump in, I just would like to plug WMC, the club organizing this. We are the Women Machinists Club, and one of our goals is to give students more hands-on experience with projects. Obviously, this is challenging because we're in the pandemic, but as Tara just put in the chat, we currently are organizing Arduino Acclimate, which is an Arduino-based competition. You'd be working with a team, developing a project, a video. It'd be perfect to put on your resume and in your portfolio. So WMC is a great option. Another option would be Engineers Without Borders. Also have to plug that because Tara and I are construction leads for the Bolivia team, where you're working with a big team and you're working on a project and you're designing something, and there's the CAD work that goes into that, and there's developing paperwork and calculations and all these other things. These are all ways that you can get into it. There's a ton of clubs on campus that do projects. So even if you're not comfortable necessarily applying to a lab yet or working in a shop yet, reach out. I guarantee that your classmates are doing things and they're doing cool things. And if you ask enough people, you'll find a cool thing that you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You should join us and do our cool things. But yeah.
Yeah, WMC is a great place to get experience. We're doing our best to get those opportunities out to our members for different types of engineers, like mechanical, there's car teams. Engineers Without Borders takes all kinds of engineers and needs all kinds of engineers. Chemical engineers, there's Chem E-Car, which is really fun. I believe civil engineers still have Concrete Canoe. So these are all interesting programs that allow you to work on like really interesting projects that will get recruiters hooked. Even better, what sometimes happens is the car programs, Chem E-Car and Concrete Canoe, are all national competition based, which means sometimes you run into people who are also on those teams. And so that's really cool because then the person you're talking to has had similar experiences. Your colleagues are often your best tool towards getting a job. Having connections is the fastest way to get a job. Just applying through the regular application is good. Reaching out to recruiters is better. Having a personal connection is best. So like, for instance, I got into Apple and I started in reliability engineering, which, you know, it's not what I wanted to do long-term, but it was a job and I needed a job and I had been rejected from 30 other jobs at that point, or just ignored. That happens too. Expect that, it happens a lot. And so once I was there, I met somebody else from Davis. I had lunch with her a few times. We got along. And she was working in manufacturing engineering. That was a department I wanted to be in. So I basically told her, I'm like, hey, I really want to work in your department. If they have an opening, do you think you could like put my resume in the pile and like talk to your manager? And she did. And that's how I ended up at my job. So your colleagues are not only your best avenue towards finding things you want to do now to get experience, building those relationships is the very bedrock of networking, and it's what's going to help you in the future. So it looks like Formula, also national competition based, so is Baja. Position advice on using group projects, and for solid resource. So group projects, when you're starting out, group projects are fine. Engineering forward, you did a part of that project, right? So if you add a screenshot of your part and the whole project and talk a little bit about it, even if other people did the more complex parts, you were still part of it. You were still engaged in those conversations. You still made your part. Your part is still impressive, no matter how simple it is. This is a great time to show my portfolio I was talking about, because I put my engineering for a project in there. This is my very first portfolio. And this is the gearbox I made. It's 4 parts. It's really basic. But you know what? It's in there. It's doing its job. It's showing that I can do SolidWorks and that I turn things funky colors, which is not a habit I've dropped. And so I think once you have like a little bit larger of a portfolio, you probably want to shift to focusing on more individual-based projects, unless it was a really impressive group project. When you're just starting out, yeah, throw them in there. They're useful. Alrighty. Are there any more questions, or would you guys want to build a portfolio slide? I don't see any more questions. We're gonna switch over to making a portfolio slide. So this is Google Slides. Now, stop me whenever you guys have questions. I'm gonna talk basically just about why I think Google Slides is useful and how I build portfolio slides in Google Slides. Just some useful little things that you can do, as well as actually, like, you know, setting it to be publicly viewable, getting the link, stuff like that. So this is, you know, my untitled presentation. This is where I'd, you know, like put my name, I'm Grace, stuff like that. And say this is our first technical slide. So we want to start with the name of the project. I'm going to grab some photos of my gyroscope. That's something you build in EME 50 if you are a mechanical engineer. So I'm just going to put gyroscope. And then I'm going to come down here and controversial opinion, I'm going to delete this text box because the text box is nice, but your text should not take up your entire slide. You want your text box to be smaller and you want to focus on images. And so it's a lot easier, I've found, to place your images and then place your text. Speaking of which, I do have some slide templates I've made that you guys are going to have these, you're going to be able to use them. And they're kind of like the two kinds of slides you're most likely going to have, which is slightly larger amount of text and important images and image-based slide. So here, the rounded boxes are images, and then you could have a caption or have a few images and then relevant background. So these are kind of the types of slides that I would recommend using because they pull focus to your images, but keep everything organized and neat. So in this case, we can go borrow some images from my original portfolio. Let's just grab these guys. Put them in here. So this is how they were originally laid out. This is not my favorite layout. As you can see, none of them are the same height. None of them are the same shape. They're not aligned. And so we want this to be like kind of visually appealing, as well as kind of having it basically like make sense for the person looking at it, so they can look at it and be like, oh, this is what I'm looking at. Oh, that's not working. They know what they're looking at, and it's not kind of like dissonant to look at. So here, when we have things like CAD and a final project that look the same, so in this case, the gyroscope kind of sitting back on its side, it's best if we place those either next to each other or one above the other. So some of this stuff is going to be like a little bit of like nitpicky design stuff. But nitpicky design stuff is how you get slightly less nitpicky design stuff. Here we also want to match heights so that they have kind of like a shared geometric feature, but now we're gonna have to make them a little smaller to fit. And I would encourage you guys, if you have pictures, to kind of like build your own slide, get your portfolio started. I can kind of answer any questions about layout that you might have. So here we have a little bit of like a challenging structure of getting this picture in with these two. So I don't want to outright get rid of it because it's a useful image, and having just two pictures will leave the slide even more unbalanced than having this. But it looks a little off. So instead of shying away from it, I'm actually going to make it a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to put my text here in this central column. So why I did that is basically the goal is to break the slide off into thirds. When you break your slide off into even quadrants, it kind of makes it more aesthetically appealing. So if you have enough photos to fill 2/3 of the slide, you can put in 2/3 of the slide of photos and 1/3 of text. If you have more like 1/4 of a slide of text, have 1/4 of a slide of text. Break it off into even either rectangles or squares and fill those with like a picture in each quadrant and then text in a quadrant, because it not only kind of helps you size it, it also helps everything be kind of organized and readable. You never really want more than like 1/3 of a page of text. That's slightly too much. So once you have that, you're able to kind of add photos, and that helps it keep it more photo based. So for gyroscope, I'd kind of say like, as part of a machining course, and then enter functional gyroscope. That's honestly probably all I put so far.
Tools used, maybe? Tools used, maybe?
Yes, that's a good one.
Also, just letting you know that your computer's at 7%.
It is, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I'm gonna go grab a charger real quick.
Sounds good. In the meantime, if the rest of you want to get started on your own slides, we can workshop them in breakout rooms if you'd be interested. Later on in the presentation, that is. Are there any questions y'all have at this point? I may not be Grace, but I can answer some questions. Emily.
Okay, so this is a rather specific question, but I'm interning currently with the System Center, which means I'm doing front-end coding. So I'm doing coding through I'm doing coding for kids, so like K through 12, and I'm using the professor's like proprietary, he designed the interface. So I want to like show it off because I'm like I'm creative, I'm coming with my own things, but it's his software and I didn't make the software and I have no idea how I can say, look what I made without being like, but it's not mine, kind of, because he's like laid the groundwork, I'm just using it.
Well, there's a great piece of advice in the chat, and that is ask permission and credit him. So you can ask for permission to basically use images of the interface and kind of provide credit kind of in like maybe a little subnote on the slide that says like interface designed by your boss's name, and then highlight which parts of it that are either visible in the image or visible as outputs that you made.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so computer no longer about to die. Here, so now that I have kind of like some text, so tools used, lathe, mill, drill press. It's more than that, but that's all I'm gonna add for now. It kind of looks awkward in the middle of the screen, so I'll probably move it around, kind of like play with where I'm putting things. Maybe shrink this a bit and see now we have half the screen taken up by these 3 photos. And that looks a little nicer. So if we maybe make the text box kind of sit on the side and then go get one more photo, let's say maybe this top view. Now we have a really good version of that, like kind of third setup. So 2/3 of photos and then 1/3 of text. Normally, you know, I'd make all these the same size, I'd round the corners, but that would probably take a little bit too long at the moment.
Could you maybe show us how to round the corners?
Rounding the corners, okay. This is something that is slightly harder to do in Google Slides, so we're gonna play a fun game and see if I remember how to do it.
I remember how to do it. You click the image, you use the crop button with the little drop down arrow next to the crop button in the top bar.
Oh, top bar, okay.
And then you go to based on shape. You taught me this once upon a time.
I remember now, but it has been a minute. So there we go. So you can also kind of grab all of these. Oh, Google Slides does not let you do all of them at once. Okay, Keynote does. Little plug for Keynote. I love it. It is, in my opinion, the best slide editor because it has a built-in vector graphics editor. Speaking of, if you don't want to buy CorelDRAW, sometimes Keynote is enough. But that's definitely a preference, and it is made by the company I work for, so I'm definitely biased. Alrighty, so question from Tara that I figure is probably one of Tara's friends. So say you've completed your portfolio and have an interview coming up, and how do you normally prepare for it? So for me, once I have my portfolio done and I have an interview coming up, there's a few things I do to prepare for an interview. The first is research the company, know who they are, what they make, where they are. I slightly over prepared for my first Apple interview and like memorized all their products and certain specs about them. You don't need to go that far, but just knowing like what they do and a bit about it. So say you're applying to like a more obscure company and they have something kind of confusing in their website, like look for a keyword you can research. That was sophomore year, Tara. And so once you have that, you've prepared, you know a little bit about the company, make sure you know what you want to talk about. So if there's a project in your portfolio that you haven't looked at in a while, maybe revisit it, remember how you made stuff, what's important about it, get excited about it again. What it really comes down to is interviewers are going to ask you about your skills and about things you've made. And so something I think it's important to remember is they're asking you about stuff you already know because they're trying to make sure you're a good fit for the job. Because if you had to like learn a bunch of stuff in order to complete the interview, you're gonna have to learn a bunch of stuff with the job, and learning on the job is a good thing. And sometimes that's expected. Like I've had interviewers say like, you're probably not gonna know this, but I'm gonna ask you about it because it's not something you teach in schools. Stuff like supply chain management. I wish we had a class on supply chain management. It is interesting, but it's something I learned at work. So when you're preparing, focus on really knowing what you know. So maybe do like a cursory look at some relevant coursework, look over your own projects, get excited. If you can have stuff in front of you that's relevant, do it. Have like some of your small projects sitting in front of you. Because if it's a phone interview, you can pick it up while you're talking about it and have like just kind of live interaction with it. If it's a video interview, you can show it. Something for in-person interviews, if you have small things or photos of projects that you can bring to the in-person interview, go for it. Like I brought small 3D printed objects and photos of some of my projects to my shop interview, and I just gave them to the interviewers and was like, this is what I can do. And then we were able to kind of talk about them and look at them together to sort of like get that information. So yeah, I definitely research the company, know your stuff. If you have any supplementary materials, print them out. And if you're applying to a company that is like a company that sells consumer products, like when I applied to Apple, I had Apple products in front of me, and that came in handy because my boss asked me to basically like pick up an Apple product, in this case, my phone, and tell her how I thought it was manufactured. And so since I had that stuff, it made sense to kind of have it with me during the interview. But that's really just more of things that you're going to normally have in your house. So say you're applying to a tech company that makes like computers, and if you have one of their computers, stuff like that. So another question, why the landscape format? So I stick with the landscape format in slides because it is really, when you're looking at something digital, which your portfolio almost always is going to be, it's kind of strange to scroll through landscape papers. Because of this like weird human thing where we're like, we go left to right, it's almost like disconcerting when you're scrolling, because like books are technically landscape because they're two portrait pages next to each other. And so this might just be like a me thing, but I've also, I've never seen a landscape portfolio, and I think it would be a little bit off-putting. But you know, it could be off-putting in a good way. However, this is also a good use of space. So landscape is better for imaging, and you have lots of images in your portfolio. Portrait is better for resumes because they're words. And so when you have words, they all fit better in that sort of like portrait format. You can also separate them easier into say columns or something. Because you're really going to want to add a lot of photos to your portfolio, it's easier to add like the words and pictures in a harmonious way in landscape orientation. That said, it's personal preference. If you're more comfortable having it portrait, there's nothing stopping you.
On the topic of pictures, I'd just like to advocate for documenting all of your projects. Photograph everything. Take a bunch of different pictures. You think you'll remember everything. I always think I'm going to remember everything. I never do. I've taken to using the voice recording app on my phone if I don't have time to like sit down and write everything out, to just like describe what I did that day. I learned some new tool, describe how it works, because then 5 weeks down the line, when somebody asks me about it, it hasn't completely gone from my brain. One thing that I've did when I was working in the BAE shop is that I would actually create these extremely detailed, almost a step-by-step process of how I made all the things. That is not necessary, but it was really helpful for me because I then had to go to my new job and I couldn't remember how to use a lathe because it's been like 2 years. But I had this step-by-step process that I'd written down where you move it here, you test the thing here. And that was really helpful for me. So at the end of the day, just make sure you don't forget things that you've put so much time into, no matter how you go about documenting it.
Catherine is absolutely right. Document everything. Take pictures when you're allowed to. If you work at a company, there are rules about that, so make sure you learn them first. But take pictures, write stuff down, write down what you've learned. Something that I learned from my very first manager at Apple that has stuck with me is he made me every week send him an email of what I did that week. So who I talked to, why I talked to them, what I developed, how far I was on my project. But what that gave me was a week by week review of my entire internship. I knew what I did every week. And so that's great because looking back on it, you don't remember that stuff off the top of your head. So it's really great to have a record. Catherine made a great point. Recording your own voice is a good way to do stuff. Videos are a great way to do stuff. If you're doing something that you're allowed to video it. Why not? It also produces some funny things like I broke my shoe at work once. The heel fell off. And so there is actual video of me doing tests in narwhal socks that nobody can ever delete because it's test video. And it just is what it is, but it's kind of funny. But telling stories like that are a good way to bond with people at work. Bonding with the person interviewing you over shared experiences makes you like more likely to get the job. And so it's always a funny story of like, oh yeah, I once epoxied the heel of my shoe back on because it fell off at work. Because it also shows tenacity. Like I didn't stop working. I just took my shoe off, set it on the repair path, and then kept working barefoot. So funny little like work stories like that. I found that interesting things really are like your best friend. Alrighty, so really quick, I'm just going to show you guys a little bit about sharing this. So right now I have it set to private. I have to give it a name. We're going to call it example. Probably spelled portfolio wrong, but you know, here we go. Get link. This is what you're looking for. So it is right now restricted, but what I can do is copy the link. And then anywhere I put it, so this is the link for this portfolio. I put this on my resume, put it in the supplementary materials box of an application. If you can't add a PDF, send it to a recruiter you're talking to. This will link people directly to this presentation. And that's going to allow them to find it and look at it. So this is good. Like I said, coding a website's not for everybody. This gives you a way to make your portfolio accessible to recruiters at minimal effort to you, where it's still a very professional way of doing it, especially if you have a nice polished portfolio. So I believe we only have like about 5 minutes left in our allotted time. I can hang out another like 10, 15 minutes if people have more questions. I also figured I would let you guys see my very first portfolio if people are interested, mostly because I know as engineers, we are perfectionists sometimes. I know I am. I'm a really disorganized one, but I am. So I just want to indicate that this does not have to be perfect. Not in the slightest, because this is the portfolio I submitted to Apple and I still got hired by them. It's from a long time ago. I've learned a lot since. For instance, I did not need 6 slides for the guitar. As much fun as these process photos are, they are not all necessary. I did not need to include this from a hackathon I did. It is a ugly 3D printed part, but you know what? I had just 3D printed and I was excited. But that's the important part. I was excited, so it makes it a valid thing to include. The castle project, I love this one. I still stick at places when I think I need a little more extra information just because it's interesting. The gyroscope, honestly, this one for mechanical engineers, leave this on there for a while. People always ask. My totem, it's all stuff that like, yeah, the slides are too long, the photos aren't aligned, the text is not what I would have gone with today, but I still got the job. So hopefully this can be a little bit of proof that it absolutely does not need to be perfect. It just needs to exist.
If you're looking for ways to build your project experience, highly recommend you check out the Women Machinists Club YouTube channel. We have some introductions to using Onshape, which is a CAD software if you haven't used SolidWorks before. It's a great way to get yourself started on just making something yourself. Another great option is the Design for Manufacturing seminar, which is taking place from now on, we hope, every quarter, led by Dan Frank. Happened for the first time last quarter, gives you an introduction to Fusion 360 and some really practical skills in terms of understanding how things are made. And always, always, always sign up for Arduino Acclimate. The link's in the chat. You get a free Arduino. You should come. Thank you for everyone for coming. Thank you so much, Grace, for organizing this. You're amazing, and I've learned a lot. And see you guys at the next professional workshop.